A man without legs got trapped in the middle of a devastating flood, and just when everything seemed lost, a rescue horse did something no one saw coming. The ending of this story will touch your heart, so make sure to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next is just amazing. The rain had started 3 days ago in the small town of Cedar Creek, nestled in the rolling hills of rural Kentucky. At first, no one paid much attention. Spring storms were common in this part of the country. But as the hours turned into days, the gentle patter on rooftops transformed into an ominous drumming that kept the townspeople awake at night. Mason Riley watched the rain from the window of his modest farmhouse, situated in one of the lowest parts of the valley. The wooden structure had been his home for 12 years, ever since the accident at the coal mine had taken his legs. With practiced movements, he wheeled himself from the kitchen to the living room, pausing to adjust the collection of buckets, catching leaks from the ceiling. A sharp gust of wind rattled the windows, and Mason frowned as he noticed the creek beyond his property swelling beyond its banks. "Not good," he muttered, reaching for the emergency radio on the side table. The static-filled voice of the local weather service confirmed his fears. Flash flood warnings had been issued for the entire county. Evacuation orders were in effect for the low-lying areas, exactly where his property sat. Mason had never been one to ask for help. After his rehabilitation, he had modified his home to accommodate his disability, transforming it into a space where he could maintain his independence. His neighbors respected his privacy, and he valued the life he had carved out for himself, away from pitying glances and unwanted assistance. But as he peered outside again, the water had crept closer to his front porch. The dirt road leading to town was now a muddy stream. His customized truck, parked in the yard, was already halfway, submerged. The landline phone emitted nothing but a hollow tone when he picked it up. The cell signal had disappeared hours ago. For the first time in years, Mason felt the cold grip of panic tightening around his chest. Across town, in the crowded community center that had been transformed into an emergency shelter, Sarah Blackwood tied her long brown hair into a tight ponytail and pulled on waterproof boots. At 34, she had spent most of her adult life working with horses at her family's rescue ranch. Today, her skills were needed for a different kind of rescue. "We've got reports of people still stranded in the valley," Sheriff Daniel Cooper addressed the group of volunteers. His weathered face was etched with exhaustion. "Roads are washed. Out and the National Guard helicopters can't fly in this weather. We need to reach them before nightfall." Sarah stepped forward. "The horses can navigate terrain that vehicles can't. We've used them in search and rescue operations before." The sheriff nodded, though uncertainty flickered across his face. "It's risky, Sarah. The currents are strong and conditions are deteriorating fast." "I'll take Willow," Sarah replied, referring to her chestnut mare. "She's experienced with difficult terrain. Who needs to be reached?" The sheriff consulted his clipboard. "Mason Riley lives alone in that old farmhouse by Hickory Creek. He's wheelchair-bound. No way he's getting out without help." A murmur rippled through the volunteers. Everyone knew Mason, though few could claim to know him well. His solitary existence had become something of a local legend, the man who needed no one. "I'll go," Sarah said without hesitation. She had sold Mason hay for his small garden a few times, though their interactions had been brief and businesslike. Her mind flashed to the location of his property, at least 4 miles of increasingly dangerous terrain. As she headed to the stables behind the community center, where several horses had been brought for safety, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Elijah Parker, a fellow rancher and former paramedic. "I'm coming with you," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You'll need someone with medical training if Riley's in bad shape." Sarah nodded gratefully as they approached the makeshift shelter where the horses were kept. Willow, a strong chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face, nickered softly at Sarah's approach. The horse had been with her through countless trail rides and competitions and had assisted in locating lost hikers in the hills during summer storms. There was an intelligence in her dark eyes that Sarah had come to trust implicitly. "Hey, girl," Sarah murmured, stroking Willow's neck. "We've got a tough job ahead." They loaded saddlebags with emergency supplies, thermal blankets, first aid kits, water, and high-energy food. Elijah chose Thunder, a sturdy black gelding with a calm temperament. By the time they were ready to depart, the rain had intensified, beating against the metal roof of the stable like 1,000 impatient fingers. The sheriff handed Sarah a map with Mason's property circled in red marker. "The creek will be overflowing here and here." He pointed to 2 locations along their route, "and this bridge is likely underwater by now. You'll need to find alternate crossings." Sarah studied the map, committing the details to memory before folding it into a waterproof pouch. "We'll find a way through. Have the emergency team standing by for when we return." As they mounted their horses and prepared to leave the relative safety of the town center, Sarah caught sight of her father, watching from the doorway of the community hall. His face was tight with concern, but he offered a nod of understanding. The Blackwood family had always believed in stepping up when others were in trouble. The first mile was manageable, with the horses picking their way carefully along flooded roadways. But as they ventured deeper into the valley, the landscape transformed into something unrecognizable. Fields had become lakes. Fences were partially submerged, creating hazardous obstacles. The rain continued to fall in heavy sheets, reducing visibility and soaking through their rain gear, despite their best preparations. At Mason's farmhouse, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The water had reached the porch now, seeping under the front door and spreading across the wooden floor like searching fingers. He had moved essential items to higher ground, medications, important documents, a photograph of his late parents, and positioned himself by the back window, watching for any sign of rescue. The radio crackled with updates, each more dire than the last. A dam upstream was showing signs of stress. Residents in affected areas were advised to seek higher ground immediately. Mason glanced at his wheelchair, then at the rising water. His thoughts raced through limited options. The house had an attic, but no way for him to reach it easily. The back of the property sloped gently upward toward a copse of trees, but navigating the muddy terrain in his wheelchair would be nearly impossible. For the first time in 12 years, Mason was forced to confront the reality of his dependence on others. The thought filled him with a mixture of dread and anger. He had built his life around never needing to be rescued. Now, as the water inched across his living room floor, the fragility of that independence was laid bare. Miles away, Sarah and Elijah had reached the first major obstacle, a section of road completely submerged beneath swiftly moving water. The planned route was impassable. "We need to head uphill," Elijah shouted over the roar of the rain and rushing water. "There's an old logging trail that circles around. It'll add time, but it's our only option." Sarah hesitated, glancing at the darkening sky. Every minute counted now. But Willow was already shifting nervously at the edge of the floodwater, sensing the danger. The horse's instincts confirmed their decision. "Lead the way," Sarah called back, turning Willow to follow Elijah and Thunder up a muddy slope. The horses struggled for traction on the slippery ground, their powerful muscles straining with each step. Sarah leaned forward in the saddle, whispering encouragement into Willow's ear. The logging trail was overgrown and treacherous, with fallen branches and sudden drop-offs. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses on foot, testing the ground before proceeding. The rain had transformed small streams into raging torrents that cut across their path. Each crossing was a calculated risk, with the horses carefully picking their way through the churning water. Sarah's thoughts kept returning to Mason, alone in his farmhouse with the waters rising. What kind of man chose such isolation? And what would he think of strangers risking their lives to save him? The few times she had interacted with him, he had been polite but distant, his eyes revealing nothing of the person behind them. As they rounded a bend in the trail, thunder suddenly reared, nearly unseating Elijah. A massive tree had fallen across their path, its roots torn from the saturated earth. There was no way around it. The hillside was too steep on one side, a sharp drop-off on the other. "We'll have to turn back, find another way," Elijah said, his voice tight with frustration. Sarah dismounted, approaching the fallen tree. She ran her hands along the wet bark, measuring the height with her eyes. "No time. We can jump it." Elijah stared at her in disbelief. "In these conditions, that's at least 4 feet high with slippery ground on both sides." "Willow can make it," Sarah said with quiet confidence. "Thunder too, if you give him a strong lead." Their eyes met in a moment of silent communication. They both knew what was at stake, not just Mason's life, but their own if they made the wrong decision. Finally, Elijah gave a terse nod. Sarah remounted Willow, feeling the horse's muscles tense beneath her. She guided her several yards back from the obstacle, giving her room to build momentum. With a gentle squeeze of her legs and a soft command, Sarah signaled Willow forward. The mare responded immediately, moving from a walk to a controlled canter despite the treacherous footing. As they approached the fallen tree, Sarah leaned forward, becoming one with her horse's motion. Willow gathered herself and leaped, sailing over the obstacle with room to spare. They landed with a splash in the mud on the other side, and Sarah quickly turned to watch Elijah and Thunder make the same approach. The black gelding was more hesitant, breaking stride twice before Elijah finally got him moving with confidence toward the tree. Thunder's jump was less graceful than Willow's, his back hooves clipping the top of the trunk, but they made it across safely. "Never doubted you for a second," Elijah said with a shaky laugh as they continued down the trail. The path eventually led them back to lower ground, closer to Mason's property. In the distance, they could make out the roof of his farmhouse, partially obscured by sheets of rain. The surrounding fields were completely flooded, with only the tops of fences visible above the water. "It's worse than we thought," Sarah said grimly. "The water must be inside the house by now." As they cautiously approached, picking their way through the flooded landscape, a new sound reached them. A low, ominous rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath the horse's hooves. Willow's ears flicked back and forth nervously. "What is that?" Sarah asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Elijah's face went pale. "The dam. It's giving way." In that moment, their mission changed from urgent to desperate. They had minutes, not hours, to reach Mason and find a way to safety before a wall of water swept through the valley. The horses sensed their riders' heightened tension and pushed forward with renewed determination, their powerful legs finding sure footing even in the treacherous conditions. Mason, too, had heard the distant rumble. From his position by the window, he watched in disbelief as 2 riders on horseback appeared through the curtain of rain, moving with purpose toward his house. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. Who would be foolish enough to be out in this weather, heading toward danger rather than away from it? As they drew closer, he recognized Sarah Blackwood's distinctive red rain jacket. Their eyes met through the rain-streaked glass, and in that moment, Mason felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the complicated mixture of relief and vulnerability that comes with being seen in a moment of complete helplessness. The water in his living room was ankle-deep now. The rumble had grown louder, and Mason knew their time was running out. Whatever happened next would require him to place his trust entirely in the hands of others and in the steady, determined stride of the chestnut mare that carried Sarah Blackwood through the rising flood. The water had risen to 6 inches inside Mason's living room by the time Sarah and Elijah reached the farmhouse. They tied their horses to the porch railing, which remained just above the floodline. Willow stood firm, her ears forward, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Thunder shifted nervously, sensing the approaching danger that rumbled in the distance. "Mason Riley?" Sarah called, pounding on the door. "Sheriff Cooper sent us. We need to evacuate you now." The door swung open to reveal Mason in his wheelchair, his expression a mixture of relief and resignation. Sarah was struck by the quiet dignity in his posture, despite the chaos surrounding him. His home, meticulously arranged to accommodate his needs, was now being claimed by the rising waters. "The dam won't hold much longer," Elijah explained, already scanning the room for essential items to save. "We have horses outside. We need to move quickly." Mason's hands tightened on the wheels of his chair. "I don't see how this is going to work. I can't ride." "You won't have to ride alone," Sarah assured him, moving closer. "You'll ride with me on Willow. She's strong enough to carry us both." Mason looked skeptical, but another ominous rumble, closer now, made the decision for him. "What do you need me to do?" Working with practiced efficiency, Sarah and Elijah gathered Mason's medications, a few personal items, and a blanket. The most challenging part would be transferring Mason to the horse. The conventional mounting process would be impossible. "We'll need to improvise," Sarah said, eyeing the rising water. "Elijah, can you bring Willow to the porch where it's higher?" As Elijah led Willow closer to the house, Sarah knelt beside Mason's wheelchair. "I know this isn't ideal, but I need you to trust me. My brother lost his leg in Afghanistan. I've helped him mount before." Something shifted in Mason's expression, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even a grudging respect. He nodded once. "Tell me what to do." Using the porch railing for support, they developed a system. Mason demonstrated remarkable upper body strength, the result of years of adapting to his condition. With Elijah's support from one side and Sarah's from the other, they managed to position Mason sideways on Willow's saddle. Sarah quickly mounted behind him, securing her arms around his waist to stabilize him. "Hold on to the saddle horn," she instructed. "Lean back against me if you need to. Willow knows to move smoothly." Indeed, the mare remained unnaturally still during the awkward mounting process, as if sensing the importance of her role. Only when Mason was securely positioned did she shift her weight, adjusting to the unusual distribution. "The route back to town will be cut off by now," Elijah said, mounting Thunder and surveying the rapidly deteriorating conditions. "We need higher ground immediately." Mason pointed toward the eastern ridge. "There's an old hunting cabin up there, belongs to the Peterson family. Haven't seen them use it in years, but it should be above the flood line." Sarah nodded. "How far?" 2 miles, as the crow flies, longer by trail." A distant crack echoed through the valley, a sound like thunder but more sustained. The animals reacted immediately, Willow throwing her head up in alarm and Thunder sidestepping nervously. "That's the dam," Elijah said grimly. "We have minutes, not hours." They urged the horses forward, away from the farmhouse and toward higher ground. The going was treacherous, with hidden obstacles beneath the muddy water. Sarah felt Mason tense with each uncertain step, but he remained silent, his focus absolute. As they reached slightly higher terrain, where the water was only fetlock deep on the horses, Mason spoke. "I appreciate what you're risking. Not many would have come." "Anyone would have," Sarah replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. Few would have attempted such a rescue in these conditions. "My wife would have liked you," Mason said unexpectedly. It was the first personal information he had volunteered. Charlotte always said you could tell everything about a person by how they treated animals and strangers in need. Before Sarah could respond, a roaring sound cut through the air. Looking back, they saw it. A surging wall of water crashing through the valley, tearing through everything in its path. Mason's farmhouse disappeared beneath the onslaught in seconds. "Ride!" Elijah shouted, spurring Thunder forward. The horses needed no encouragement. Their survival instincts kicked in, and they lunged forward with desperate energy. Willow, despite carrying double weight, matched Thunder stride for stride. Sarah felt Mason gripping the saddle horn with white knuckles, his body tense but balanced against hers. The surge was gaining on them. Each time Sarah dared to look back, the wall of water seemed closer, devouring the landscape behind them. The sound was deafening, a roar that drowned out everything except the pounding of the horses' hooves and her own racing heartbeat. They reached the base of the eastern ridge, where the ground began to slope upward. The horses slowed, laboring against both the incline and the increasingly muddy ground. Thunder, slightly ahead, suddenly stumbled, his front leg catching in an unseen hole. Elijah managed to keep his seat, but valuable seconds were lost as the horse regained his footing. Those seconds might cost them everything. The surge was less than 50 yards behind now, carrying debris that would crush them if it caught up. "There!" Mason pointed to a narrow trail cutting diagonally up the hillside. "That leads to the cabin. It's steeper but more direct." Sarah guided Willow toward the trail, the mare responding to the slightest pressure of her legs. The path was barely visible, overgrown and slick with mud, but it headed upward, away from the deadly flood. As they began their ascent, a massive section of fence carried by the floodwaters crashed into the base of the trail behind them. Thunder reared in panic, nearly unseating Elijah. Sarah felt Mason start to slip and tightened her grip around his waist, leaning forward to counterbalance. "I've got you," she assured him, feeling his hands clutch her arm. "Willow, steady girl, steady." The mare, despite her own fear, responded to Sarah's calm voice. She planted her hooves firmly on the narrow trail and held her position while Thunder fought to regain his composure. In that critical moment, Willow's training and temperament made the difference between disaster and survival. Once both horses were stable, they continued up the trail, climbing steadily above the rising waters. The surge lost momentum as it hit the base of the ridge, spreading outward rather than upward, but the rain continued to fall in blinding sheets, making the ascent treacherous. Halfway up the ridge, they encountered another obstacle. A landslide had taken out a section of the trail, leaving a gap of about 6 feet. Below the gap, the hillside dropped steeply to the floodwaters. There was no way around. The terrain was too steep on either side. Elijah dismounted to assess the damage. "We can't jump this, not in these conditions, not with the extra weight on Willow." "We don't have time to find another route," Sarah replied, acutely aware of Mason's silence. This was his life they were discussing, yet he offered no opinion. His face set in a mask of grim acceptance. Elijah made a quick decision. "We'll have to cross on foot. The horses can jump it without riders." The logistics were complicated. Mason couldn't walk across, and carrying him over the gap while maintaining their own balance would be nearly impossible. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "The rain's letting up a bit," Mason observed quietly, "and there's a fallen tree just below us. If we can move it, it might bridge the gap." They followed his gaze. Indeed, a young pine had been partially uprooted by the same slide that damaged the trail. Its top was still attached to the hillside, but the root ball had pulled free, leaving the trunk spanning diagonally across the space below them. "It might work," Elijah said, already scrambling down the slope to inspect the tree. "But we'd need to secure it somehow." Sarah reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a coil of rope. "We came prepared for emergencies." While Elijah worked to position the tree, Sarah helped Mason dismount, a more challenging process than getting him on. The horse had been. The muddy ground offered little stability for his wheelchair, which they had managed to bring along, strapped to Thunder's saddle. "Been a while since I've done any lumberjacking," Mason commented dryly as they watched Elijah struggle with the tree. His attempt at humor revealed more about his character than hours of conversation might have. Despite everything, he hadn't lost the ability to find lightness in darkness. Using the rope and their combined strength, they managed to drag the tree into position across the gap. It wasn't ideal. The trunk was slender and slick with rain. But it would have to do. The question remained, how to get Mason across. "I can cross by myself," he said, surprising them both. "I'll need to crawl, but I've got the upper body strength for it." Sarah looked doubtful. "It's too risky. The tree could shift at any moment." "It's either that or you leave me behind," Mason stated plainly. "And I don't think either of you came all this way to do that." Before they could argue further, Mason lowered himself from his wheelchair onto the ground and began dragging himself towards the makeshift bridge. His movements were powerful and precise, the result of years of adapting to his condition. Elijah quickly positioned himself on the other side of the gap, ready to assist once Mason reached him. Sarah stayed close behind Mason, one hand hovering near his belt, ready to grab him if the tree shifted. Her heart hammered in her chest as she watched him navigate the slippery trunk with methodical determination. Every inch was a victory against impossible odds. Halfway across, the tree creaked ominously. Mason paused, his muscles tense with effort. Sarah could see the strain in his shoulders, the concentration etched into every line of his face. For a moment, she thought the bridge would collapse beneath them. "Keep moving," she urged softly. "You're almost there." With renewed determination, Mason continued forward, his progress steady despite the treacherous conditions. When he reached the other side, Elijah's strong hands pulled him to safety. Sarah crossed quickly behind them, relief washing over her as her feet touched solid ground. The next challenge was getting the horses across. Sarah whistled, a specific signal she had trained Willow to respond to. The mare approached the edge of the gap, her ears forward, assessing the situation with an intelligence that never ceased to amaze Sarah. "Go on, girl," Sarah encouraged. "You can make it." Willow backed up several paces, then launched herself across the gap in a powerful leap that cleared the distance easily. Thunder followed with similar grace, both horses demonstrating their mountain-bred sure-footedness. With the immediate danger behind them, they continued up the trail, Sarah and Elijah taking turns supporting Mason while the horses followed closely behind. The rain had indeed lessened, though the wind continued to howl through the trees, bending them at alarming angles. Near the summit of the ridge, they spotted the hunting cabin, a simple structure of weathered wood and stone that had stood against countless storms. It wasn't much, but it represented safety in a world that had turned hostile. The cabin doctor was secured with a simple padlock, which Elijah broke open with an apologetic glance at Mason. "I'll make sure the Petersons are compensated." Inside, the cabin was basic but dry, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with chairs, and a pair of bunk beds built into the wall. Mason's wheelchair, muddy but intact, was brought inside, allowing him to regain some independence. While Elijah tended to the horses in a small lean-to shelter attached to the cabin, Sarah managed to start a fire using wood that had been stacked beside the fireplace. The warmth spread slowly through the space, taking the edge off their wet clothes and chilled bodies. "How long do you think we'll be stuck here?" Mason asked, wheeling himself closer to the fire. Sarah peered out the window at the darkening sky. "At least until morning. The floodwaters will need time to recede, and it's not safe to travel these trails in the dark, even without the flood." Mason nodded, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. "I owe you both my life." "You'd have done the same," Sarah replied, though she wondered if she believed it. The Mason Riley she had known by reputation was a solitary figure, one who had seemingly cut himself off from the community. "Once, maybe," Mason admitted, surprising her with his candor. "Before the accident, I was a different person, more connected. Afterward." He trailed off, staring into the flames. Sarah didn't press him. Instead, she busied herself inventorying their supplies. They had enough food for a simple meal and breakfast, plenty of water, and the cabin was well stocked with blankets and basic necessities. When Elijah returned, shaking rain from his coat, the three of them settled into an unexpectedly comfortable conversation. The shared trauma of their escape had created a bond that transcended their previous relationships, or lack thereof. As night fell fully outside, the sound of the rain against the cabin roof created a soothing backdrop to their discussion. Mason gradually opened up, sharing stories about his life before the mining accident, about Charlotte, the wife he had lost to illness 3 years earlier, and about his decision to live in isolation afterward. "Charlotte was my connection to the world," he explained. "After she was gone, it seemed easier to just disconnect entirely." "I understand that," Sarah said softly. "After my divorce, I threw myself into work with the horses. Animals don't ask complicated questions or make you feel like you've failed somehow." Elijah, who had been quiet for some time, added his own perspective. "Sometimes the hardest part of surviving isn't the physical challenge, it's finding reasons to stay engaged with life afterward." The conversation meandered into the night, touching on grief, resilience, and the unexpected connections that emerge in moments of crisis. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the landscape, but within the cabin, something new was taking shape, a tentative bridge across the isolation that had defined Mason's existence for too long. As exhaustion finally claimed them and they prepared to sleep, Elijah taking the lower bunk, Sarah the upper, and Mason insisting he was comfortable in his wheelchair near the fire. Sarah found herself reflecting on the day's events. They had come to save a man's life and had succeeded against impossible odds, but perhaps something equally important had happened along the way. In the soft glow of the dying fire, she watched Mason's profile as he gazed thoughtfully into the embers. He seemed different somehow, less closed off, more present. The facade of complete self-sufficiency had cracked, revealing glimpses of the man beneath. "Sarah." Mason's voice was quiet in the semi-darkness. "Yes? That horse of yours, Willow. I've never seen anything like her, the way she handled everything today." He shook his head in wonder. It was almost like she understood what was at stake. Sarah smiled into the darkness. "Some animals just have a sense about things. Willow's special that way, always has been. When we get back, if my land isn't completely destroyed, I'd like to learn more about horses. Maybe even get one of my own." The statement hung in the air between them. Significant, not for what was said, but for what it implied. Mason Riley was thinking about a future that included connections beyond his solitary existence. "Willow would make a good teacher," Sarah replied, her voice warm with promise. "And so would I." As sleep finally claimed them, the storm outside began to subside, its fury spent. In its wake would come the daunting task of rebuilding, not just homes and infrastructure, but lives and connections long neglected. It would not be easy, but as the events of this day had proven, impossible challenges could be overcome with courage, determination, and unexpected allies. And sometimes, Sarah reflected, as she drifted towards sleep, those allies came with 4 legs and an uncanny ability to navigate not just treacherous terrain, but the complex landscape of human need and resilience. Dawn broke over the ridge with tentative fingers of light pushing. Through clouds that had finally exhausted their fury, Sarah woke to the unfamiliar surroundings of the hunting cabin, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She glanced across the room to where Mason slept, still in his wheelchair, his head tilted at an angle that would surely result in a stiff neck. Despite the discomfort of his position, his face looked more peaceful than she would have expected. Elijah was already up, standing by the window with a steaming cup of something in his hands. He nodded toward a small pot on the wood stove. Found some instant coffee in the emergency supplies. It's terrible, but it's hot. Sarah accepted a cup gratefully, joining him at the window. Below them, the valley stretched out like a vast, muddy lake. Mason's farmhouse was barely visible, just the peak of the roof showing above the receding waters. The dam break had transformed the landscape into something unrecognizable, with debris scattered across what had once been fields and pastures. "It's going to take months to rebuild," Elijah murmured. "Some folks might not bother." The comment hung in the air as Mason stirred behind them, grimacing as he straightened in his chair. "Morning," he said gruffly, wheeling himself toward the window to assess the damage for himself. His expression remained neutral as he surveyed what remained of his property. "Well," he said finally, "never was much attached to material things anyway." Sarah handed him a cup of coffee, which he accepted with a nod of thanks. "The water will recede faster than you think," she told him, "and the community will help with rebuilding. That's how things work in Cedar Creek." "Been a while since I counted myself part of that community," Mason replied, though there was more thoughtfulness than bitterness in his tone. "Not sure folks would be lining up to help the local hermit." Elijah snorted. "You'd be surprised. Nothing brings people together like disaster. Besides, after word gets out about our little adventure, you'll be part of the story everyone's telling." They ate a simple breakfast of energy bars from Sarah's saddlebag, discussing their route. Back to town. The main roads would still be impassable, but the ridge trail continued north before descending into the outskirts of Cedar Creek. If they started soon, they could reach town by early afternoon. "The horses will be tired," Sarah cautioned as she checked on Willow and Thunder in the lean-to. Both animals appeared remarkably recovered after their ordeal, though Willow's left front leg showed some swelling from the strain of carrying double weight across difficult terrain. "We'll take it slow," she decided, gently probing the mare's leg. "She's not lame, but I don't want to push her." Getting Mason back on Willow proved easier than the day before, now that they had established a system. Still, Sarah could see that the events of the previous day had taken their toll on him as, well, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone managing significant pain. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly as they prepared to leave the cabin. Mason's mouth tightened. "Just the usual. Been a while since I pushed myself that hard." Sarah suspected it was more than that, but she didn't press the issue. Independence clearly mattered to Mason. Questioning his ability to endure would only damage the fragile trust that had developed between them. The journey back to town was slow, but mercifully uneventful. The ridge trail was muddy but passable, winding through pine forests that had been largely spared the devastation below. Occasionally, they stopped to rest the horses and to take in the extent of the flooding. From their elevated vantage point, they could see rescue helicopters circling above the hardest-hit areas. And in the distance, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles along the main highway. "Looks like they've got the northern access road. And clear at least," Elijah observed. "That's where they'll be bringing in relief supplies." As they descended toward town, they began to encounter other people, mostly emergency workers and volunteers, clearing debris from the less damaged roads. Word of their approach spread quickly, and by the time they reached the outskirts of Cedar Creek, a small crowd had gathered to meet them. Sheriff Cooper was among the first to greet them, relief evident on his weathered face. "Thought we'd lost you three when that dam broke," he said, helping Mason dismount from Willow. "Whole valley got hit. We're still assessing the damage." The news sobered their mood immediately. Their own survival, hard won as it was now, seemed like a minor miracle in the context of wider devastation. Mason, who had maintained his composure throughout their ordeal, appeared shaken by the implications. "Anyone hurt?" he asked simply. "Some injuries, but thankfully everyone's been accounted for so far," the sheriff replied. But the early warning system saved a lot of lives. Your place got hit hard though, Mason. I'm sorry. Mason nodded, accepting the information with the same quiet stoicism he'd shown throughout their journey. House can be rebuilt, or not. Got some thinking to do about that. They were ushered to the community center, which had been transformed into a relief station. Volunteers moved efficiently through the crowded space, distributing supplies and coordinating temporary housing. Sarah led Willow and Thunder to a makeshift stable area where several other horses were being cared for by veterinary volunteers. "This girl deserves special treatment," Sarah told the young vet, examining Willow's swollen leg. "She carried 2 people through floodwaters and up a mountain yesterday." The vet looked impressed. "She'll get the best care we can provide." Remarkable animal. Inside the center, Mason found himself the unexpected focus of attention as word of their rescue spread. People he barely knew approached to express relief at his safety, offer assistance, or simply shake his hand. The experience was clearly uncomfortable for him, but Sarah noticed he made an effort to engage, however briefly, with each person. Dr. Abigail Fletcher, the town's only physician, insisted on examining all 3 of them. Exposure, traumatic stress, potential infections from floodwater. "I've seen it all in the last 24 hours, she explained as she checked Mason's vital signs. "And you, sir, look like you haven't slept properly in days." "Wheelchair's not the most comfortable bed," Mason admitted, "but I've dealt with worse." The doctor frowned. "You're staying in the medical wing tonight. No arguments." To Sarah's surprise, Mason didn't protest. Perhaps the ordeal had taken more out of him than he was willing to admit, or maybe something had shifted in his attitude toward accepting help. Either way, the change was notable. As evening approached, the community gathered for a meal prepared by volunteers using donated supplies. The atmosphere was subdued but not defeated, a resilient community already looking toward recovery. Sarah found herself seated between Elijah and Mason, the 3 of them bound by their shared experience in a way that made words unnecessary. Mayor Patricia Collins addressed the gathered crowd, her normally polished appearance replaced by practical work clothes and mud-splattered boots. "Cedar Creek has faced challenges before, and we'll get through this one together. Already we're seeing the best of our community, neighbors helping neighbors, strangers becoming friends. The road ahead is long, but we won't walk it alone." As the mayor continued outlining recovery plans, Sarah felt Mason shift beside her. "Never much cared for speeches," he murmured, "but she's right about one thing. This isn't something to face alone." The admission seemed to cost him something, a concession against years of careful isolation. Later, as Mason prepared to move to the medical wing for the night, he paused beside Sarah. "I want to thank you properly, not just for yesterday, but for—" He hesitated, searching for words. "For treating me like a person, not a problem to solve." Sarah smiled. "That's what Willow did too. Animals have a way of seeing us clearly, no preconceptions, no judgments." "Smart horse," Mason replied, a rare smile softening his features. "When things settle down, I'd like to meet her again, under better circumstances." The following days brought the expected challenges of disaster recovery. The National Guard arrived with heavy equipment to clear roads and assess structural damage. Relief supplies poured in from neighboring communities. Temporary housing was established for those who had lost their homes entirely. Sarah divided her time between helping with general recovery efforts and caring for the horses that had been affected by the flood. Willow recovered quickly from her ordeal, though Sarah kept her on light duty, using her primarily for companionship visits to displaced residents staying at the community center. A week after the flood, she brought Willow to visit Mason, who had been discharged from the medical wing but remained at the center while decisions about his property were made. She found him outside, basking in rare autumn sunshine, his wheelchair positioned to observe the distant view of the valley. "Brought someone to see you," Sarah announced, leading Willow forward. The mare approached Mason without hesitation, lowering her head to his eye level. Mason reached out slowly, stroking her neck with a gentleness that spoke volumes about his character. "Hello again," he said softly. "Looks like you've recovered faster than I have." "She's resilient," Sarah agreed, settling on a bench nearby. "The vet says she'll be back to full strength in another week or so." Mason continued petting Willow, his movements reverent. "I've been thinking about what happens next. The insurance adjuster says my place is a total loss. Land's still there, but everything else needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. What are you thinking of doing?" Sarah asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. "That's the question, isn't it?" Mason's eyes remained on Willow. "For 12 years, I've lived in that valley, keeping to myself, thinking that was all I needed or deserved. Now," he shrugged, "now I'm not so sure anymore." Sarah waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "The county's offering land swaps for flood victims," he continued. "Higher ground, less risk of future flooding. There's a parcel up for consideration near your family's ranch. 10 acres, gentle slope, good view." Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Sounds nice." "It is," Mason agreed. "Visited it yesterday. Sheriff Cooper drove me out." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Way I see it, a man gets few chances. To completely start over might be foolish not to take this one." "Starting over doesn't have to mean staying alone," Sarah ventured. The words carried more weight than she'd intended, but she didn't regret them. Mason met her eyes then, his expression open in a way she hadn't seen before. "No, it doesn't. That's something else I've been thinking about." He gestured to Willow. "Been a long time since I had any connection to animals, or people for that matter. Maybe it's time to change that too." 3 weeks after the flood, Mason signed the paperwork for the land swap. The new property sat on a ridge overlooking the valley, protected from future flooding and accessible by a newly paved road. The county's disaster relief program, combined with his insurance settlement, provided enough funding to begin construction on a new, fully accessible home. What surprised the community wasn't that Mason chose to rebuild, but that he actively sought input on the design, participating in planning meetings and incorporating suggestions for features that would make the space welcoming for visitors. Most surprising of all was his request to include a small stable and paddock area in the plans. Sarah found herself spending increasing amounts of time at the construction site, initially offering advice about the equestrian facilities, but gradually becoming involved in other aspects of the project as well. Their friendship, forged in crisis, deepened through the shared purpose of creating Mason's new beginning. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they reviewed plans for the stable with the contractor, Mason made an unexpected request. "I'd like to learn to ride," he stated, as matter-of-factly as if he were asking for a glass of water. Sarah blinked in surprise. "You want to ride a horse?" "No, an elephant," Mason replied, his dry humor making a rare appearance. "Yes, a horse, if it's possible. I've been researching adaptive riding programs. There are specialized saddles, techniques. People with conditions like mine do it." "I know they do," Sarah said, recovering from her surprise. "I just didn't expect you'd be interested." Mason's expression grew thoughtful. That day on Willow, being on horseback again after so many years, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Freedom, movement. I want to feel that again on my own terms. Sarah nodded, already mentally cataloging what they would need, which horses might be suitable, how to adapt her teaching methods. "We can make it happen. It won't be easy, but we can do it." "I'm counting on that," Mason replied, his voice carrying a warmth that had become increasingly familiar. "Seems to be what you do best, making impossible things happen." As the weeks passed and winter settled over Kentucky, Mason's new home took shape on the ridge. The community's involvement didn't wane as the flood receded from memory. If anything, the project became a symbol of Cedar Creek's resilience and renewal. Volunteers appeared regularly to assist with construction, landscaping, and eventually furnishing the new space. Throughout it all, Willow remained a constant presence. Sarah brought her to the site almost daily, where the mayor patiently allowed Mason to practice grooming, handling, and eventually the basics of horsemanship from his wheelchair. Their connection deepened, built on mutual trust and understanding. By early December, the main house was complete enough for Mason to move in, though work continued on the stable and outbuildings. The housewarming gathering, which Mason would have found unthinkable months earlier, filled the spacious open-plan living area with people from throughout the community, many of whom had contributed to rebuilding his life in ways both large and small. Sheriff Cooper raised a toast as the evening reached its peak, to new beginnings, unlikely friendships, and the strength we find in each other. As glasses clinked and conversations flowed around him, Mason found Sarah by the large windows overlooking the valley where his old home had stood. In the darkness, the flood damage was invisible, the scattered lights of rebuilding projects creating a constellation of hope across the landscape. "Remember what you said to me that first day in the hunting cabin?" he asked quietly. "About how some animals just have a sense about things?" Sarah nodded. "I meant it, especially about Willow. I've been thinking about that, about instincts and second chances." Mason's voice carried an emotion she hadn't heard before, about how sometimes it takes losing everything to see what's been missing all along. Outside, snow began to fall, delicate flakes illuminated by the warm light spilling from the windows. In the newly constructed stable nearby, Willow and 2 other horses Mason had acquired, including a gentle gelding specially trained for adaptive riding, settled into their stalls for the night, unaware of their role in the transformation unfolding in the house on the hill. Sarah placed her hand lightly on Mason's shoulder, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Some things aren't meant to be faced alone," she reminded him, echoing his own words from weeks earlier. Mason covered her hand with his own, his eyes reflecting not the loss he had endured, but the unexpected gifts that had followed. "No," he agreed softly, "they're not." In that moment, surrounded by the community he had once shunned and connected to a woman who had risked everything to save him, Mason Riley understood that recovery wasn't just about rebuilding structures, but about opening doors that had been closed for far too long. And sometimes those doors were opened not by human hands, but by 4 steady hooves and an intuitive heart that recognized courage when others saw only limitation. Spring arrived in Cedar Creek with the promise of renewal that seemed especially poignant this year. The scars of the flood were still visible throughout the valley. Barren patches where homes once stood, debris caught in treetops marking the height of the waters, the ghostly outlines of washed-out roads being rebuilt. But alongside these reminders of loss, new growth emerged with stubborn persistence. Construction crews worked steadily to rebuild bridges and repair infrastructure. Fields that had been underwater were being prepared for planting. The community, tested by disaster, had not merely survived, but grown stronger through shared purpose. On the ridge overlooking the valley, Mason's property had transformed into something none would have predicted 6 months earlier. The house, designed for accessibility without sacrificing beauty, sat comfortably on the landscape with large windows that welcomed light and views from every direction. The stable and paddock area, completed just after the last winter snow, now housed 3 horses, gifts of fate and careful planning that had become central to Mason's new life. Sarah arrived early that morning, her truck crunching on the gravel driveway as she pulled up beside the stable. Today marked an important milestone, Mason's first official adaptive riding lesson using the specialized equipment that had arrived the previous week. Despite months of preparation, she felt an unexpected flutter of nerves as she unloaded the custom saddle from her truck. "You're early," Mason called from the stable doorway, wheeling himself forward to greet her. The changes in him were subtle but significant. His shoulders less tense, his expression more open, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone comfortable in their surroundings. "Wanted to get everything set up perfectly," Sarah admitted, hefting the specialized saddle. "It's not every day I get to teach someone as stubborn as you." Mason laughed, a sound that had once been rare, but now came easily. Stubborn meets stubborn. Should be interesting. Together they prepared Jasper, the gentle bay gelding Mason had acquired specifically for adaptive riding. The horse stood patiently as they fitted him with the custom saddle designed with additional handholds and security features. Nearby, Willow watched from her paddock, her interest evident as she trotted along the fence line. "She's jealous," Mason observed, nodding toward the mare. "Thinks she should be the one giving lessons." Sarah smiled, adjusting a strap on the saddle. "She's earned the right to that opinion, but Jasper's training makes him the better choice for this." The specialized mounting ramp they had installed allowed Mason to position his wheelchair alongside the horse at the perfect height. Sarah had studied adaptive riding techniques for months, consulting with specialists and modifying approaches to suit Mason's specific needs. Yet for all their preparation, this moment carried emotional weight beyond the technical challenges. "Ready?" Sarah asked, positioned to assist if needed. Mason nodded, his expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability that reminded her of that first day in the flood, the complicated courage of accepting help while maintaining dignity. Using his powerful upper body strength, Mason executed the transfer from wheelchair to saddle with practiced precision. They had rehearsed this movement dozens of times, but today was different. Today he would actually ride, not just sit on a stationary horse. Sarah secured the safety straps and handed him the specially designed reins. "How does it feel?" she asked, watching closely for any signs of discomfort. Mason took a moment to settle into the saddle, adjusting his position slightly. Then a smile broke across his face, not the restrained smile she had grown accustomed to, but something radiant with pure joy. "It feels like flying," he said simply. They started slowly, with Sarah leading Jasper in careful circles around the arena they had constructed adjacent to the stable. Mason focused on his balance and the basic commands they had practiced. Despite his initial concerns about coordination, he demonstrated a natural feel for the horse's movement, his body remembering skills from childhood experiences long before his accident. "You're a natural," Sarah encouraged, gradually extending the lead rope to give him more independence. "Had a good teacher," Mason replied, his focus unwavering as he guided Jasper through a turn. By the end of the hour-long session, Mason was controlling Jasper independently within the arena, his confidence growing with each successful transition. When they finally finished, Sarah could see the exertion in the slight tremor of his arms as he removed his riding helmet, but his expression was triumphant. "So?" she asked, helping him transfer back to his wheelchair. "Verdict? When can we do it again?" he answered immediately, his eyes bright with an emotion she hadn't seen before, something beyond satisfaction or accomplishment, something closer to liberation. The riding lessons became the highlight of Mason's week, each session building on the last as he developed strength, balance, and an increasingly nuanced connection with Jasper. Sarah watched the transformation with professional pride and personal wonder. The man who had once defined himself by independence was now flourishing through connection, not just with horses, but with the wider world they represented. News of Mason's progress spread through Cedar Creek, inspiring other adaptive sports programs in the community. The local newspaper ran a feature about his journey from flood survivor to equestrian, complete with photographs of him riding Jasper along the ridge trail with Sarah beside him on Willow. The story caught the attention of a regional adaptive sports organization, which reached out to invite Mason to speak at their annual conference. "They want me to talk about resilience," Mason told Sarah one afternoon as they groomed the horses together after a ride. His tone carried disbelief, though not displeasure. "Me, the guy who spent a decade hiding from the world." "Who better?" Sarah countered, brushing Willow's gleaming coat. "You've lived both sides of the story." Mason considered this, his hands continuing their careful work on Jasper's mane. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he said finally. "The riding, the recovery, all of it." Sarah paused, sensing the weight behind his words. Their relationship had evolved beyond instructor and student, beyond even friendship, into something neither had named, but both felt acutely. The unspoken question hovered between them. What came next? "We helped each other," she replied carefully. "That day in the flood changed both our lives." Mason nodded, apparently willing to let the moment pass without pushing further. But later, as Sarah prepared to leave, he caught her hand. "Have dinner with me tomorrow? Not here. Somewhere special. There's a new place in town everyone's talking about." Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face because Mason added quickly, "Unless you'd rather not. I know we've never discussed." "Yes," she interrupted, a smile spreading across her face. "I'd like that very much." The restaurant, built where a flood-damaged building had once stood, represented Cedar Creek's renewal, innovative local cuisine served in a space designed to showcase views of the surrounding landscape. Mason had reserved a quiet corner table with discreet accommodations for his wheelchair. As they settled in, Sarah realized this was the first time they had been together outside the context of horses or recovery work. Simply two people sharing a meal and conversation. The evening flowed easily, their connection transcending the change in setting. They talked about the future, Mason's plans to expand the adaptive riding program, Sarah's dreams of establishing a therapeutic equestrian center that would serve the entire region. Their visions overlapped and complemented each other in ways that felt both exciting and inevitable. "I've been thinking about partnership options," Mason said as they shared dessert. "For the therapeutic riding center, my land has the space, your expertise provides the foundation. Together, we could create something special." "A partnership," Sarah repeated, the word carrying multiple meanings in the candlelit space between them. "Is that what you're proposing?" Mason held her gaze, the directness she had come to value in him fully present. "For now, though I hope it might be just the beginning." Spring turned to summer, and the partnership took shape in both professional and personal dimensions. The plans for the Cedar Ridge Therapeutic Equestrian Center advanced from concept to reality, with construction beginning on an indoor riding arena that would allow year-round programs. Mason and Sarah developed a business model that combined private lessons, community outreach, and specialized programs for various abilities and needs. Their personal relationship deepened with the same careful intentionality that characterized their professional collaboration. Mason, who had once defined himself by self-sufficiency, discovered the difference between isolation and independence. Sarah, who had always connected more easily with horses than people, found in Mason a companion who understood both worlds. By late summer, the center was ready for its first official programs. The grand opening ceremony attracted people from throughout the county, families with children who would benefit from equine therapy, veterans interested in the adaptive riding program, community leaders eager to support another milestone in Cedar Creek's recovery. Mayor Collins delivered opening remarks, praising the vision and perseverance that had transformed tragedy into opportunity. "1 year ago, our community faced its greatest challenge when the floodwaters rose," she told the gathered crowd. "Today, we celebrate not just recovery, but renewal. This center represents the best of Cedar Creek: resilience, innovation, and heart. As Mason wheeled forward to cut the ceremonial ribbon, Sarah stood beside him, Willow's reins in her hand. The mare, now something of a local celebrity, had been groomed to perfection for the occasion, her chestnut coat gleaming in the summer sunshine. She stood calmly as cameras flashed and applause rippled through the audience. None of this would exist without this remarkable horse, Mason told the crowd, gesturing toward Willow. When the floodwaters threatened to take everything, she demonstrated courage beyond instinct. Some might call it coincidence or good fortune, but those of us who work with animals know better. There are connections that transcend explanation, bonds that form in moments of greatest need. His eyes found Sarah's as he continued, and sometimes those connections show us possibilities we never imagined for ourselves. They lead us to rebuild not just homes, but lives, and to discover that the greatest strength often lies in reaching out rather than standing alone. The center thrived through the autumn months, quickly establishing itself as a model program that drew visitors and students from neighboring counties. Mason and Sarah worked in seamless tandem, their complementary skills creating an environment where both humans and horses could reach their full potential. On the anniversary of the flood, Cedar Creek held a community-wide remembrance ceremony honoring the collective resilience that had carried them through recovery. The event concluded with a demonstration at the Equestrian Center, where Mason led a group of adaptive riding students through a series of exercises that showcased both their skills and their confidence. As the last riders departed and the stable quieted for the evening, Mason found Sarah in Willow's stall, the familiar ritual of grooming creating a peaceful end to an emotional day. He watched from the doorway for a moment, struck by the tableau they created. The woman and the horse, who had changed the course of his life, bathed in the golden light of sunset streaming through the stable windows. "Penny for your thoughts," Sarah said, glancing up with a smile that still quickened his pulse. "Just thinking about how different things would be if you two hadn't shown up at my door that day," Mason replied, wheeling closer. "If you'd taken the safe route instead of the right one." Sarah ran the brush along Willow's flank in long, smooth strokes. "I knew she could do it. Some horses just have that special quality, an instinct that goes beyond training. Some people too," Mason added softly. Later, as they sat on the porch of Mason's house, their house now since Sarah had moved in 2 months earlier, the valley below was dotted with lights from rebuilt homes and businesses. The physical recovery was nearly complete, though the emotional landscape had been permanently altered by shared experience. "I heard from the National Equine Therapy Association today," Sarah mentioned, curled comfortably in a chair beside Mason's wheelchair. "They want to feature our program in their upcoming conference. Apparently we're becoming known for innovation in adaptive techniques." Mason nodded, unsurprised. "We make a good team, always have, from day one." "A year ago today, I was gearing up to ride into a flood," Sarah mused. "If someone had told me then that it would lead to all this." She gestured to encompass the center, the home, the life they had built together. "Would you have believed them?" Mason asked. Sarah considered the question. "Maybe not, but I would have followed Willow anyway. Some paths you take on faith." Mason reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of habit. "I've been thinking about paths too, about next steps." Something in his tone made Sarah turn to look at him fully. "What kind of next steps?" From his pocket, Mason withdrew a small velvet box. "The kind that make official what we already know, that this partnership, this life we've built, it's everything I never knew I wanted until you showed me it was possible." Sarah's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring, elegant in its simplicity, a small diamond catching the last light of day. "Mason, I'm not asking because I need you or because you saved me," he clarified, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I'm asking because loving you has taught me what real independence looks like. Two people choosing each other every day, supporting each other's strengths, filling in the gaps. It's the opposite of everything I thought I wanted before the flood, and everything I know I need now. Sarah took the box from his hand, examining the ring with wonder. You know, Willow deserves some credit for this too, she said, a smile breaking through the tears that had gathered unexpectedly. Her matchmaking skills are unparalleled. Is that a yes? Mason asked, hope and certainty mingled in his expression. Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to close the distance between them. It's a yes. It's been yes since the moment we made it to that cabin on the ridge. Their kiss was gentle, but filled with promise. Not the desperate connection of survivors, but the grounded certainty of partners who had chosen their path with open eyes. In the stable nearby, Willow nickered softly in the gathering darkness, perhaps sensing the shift in emotional currents, perhaps simply anticipating her evening meal. The mare, who had once carried two people through floodwaters to safety, had no way of understanding the ripple effects of that journey. The lives transformed, the community strengthened, the love discovered. But Sarah and Mason understood. As they sat together, watching night fall over the valley that had nearly claimed them both, they recognized that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes it arrives on four steady hooves, guided by instinct and courage. And sometimes the greatest acts of heroism lead not just to survival, but to a life reimagined, built on connection rather than isolation, on shared strength rather than solitary endurance. The flood had taken much from Cedar Creek, but what it had given in return was immeasurable. A community bound by shared resilience, a couple united by unexpected circumstances, and a profound understanding that the most powerful forces are not those that destroy, but those that connect, heart to heart, hand to hand, and human to horse, in the quiet miracle of everyday courage. 6 months later, their wedding took place at the center they had built together. Mason, seated on Jasper with a specially designed, formal saddle, met Sarah, who rode Willow down an aisle created between paddocks filled with well-wishers. The ceremony celebrated not just their union, but the journey that had brought them together, a journey that had begun in crisis, but culminated in joy. As they exchanged vows beneath an arch adorned with wildflowers from the ridge, Sarah thought of that desperate day in the flood, of the split-second decision to trust Willow's instincts, of the countless small choices that had led to this moment. None of it had been guaranteed. All of it had required faith in horses, in humans, in the possibility of beginning again. Mason, looking up at the woman who had first appeared as a rescuer and now stood before him as a partner, felt the full circle of their story. The man who had once believed he needed no one now understood. The true strength lay not in isolation, but in connection. The floodwaters that had threatened to take everything had instead brought him a gift beyond measure. The courage to open doors long closed, to trust not just himself, but others, to build a life defined by possibility rather than limitation. And in the stable nearby, Willow stood watching, her role in their story complete yet ongoing, a living reminder that sometimes the path to salvation comes not through human hands, but through the steady heart of an animal who recognizes courage when others see only need. The journey that had begun in rising waters had led them here, to solid ground, to shared purpose, to a love built on mutual respect and understanding. As Cedar Creek continued its own recovery, Mason and Sarah's story became part of the community's collective narrative, a testament to resilience, an affirmation that from the greatest challenges can come the most unexpected blessings, and proof that sometimes heroism wears not a cape, but a saddle, and salvation arrives on four steady hooves. guided by an intuitive heart that recognizes the extraordinary potential in ordinary courage. Dear listeners, we hope that Mason and Sarah's journey has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most unexpected connections can transform our lives in profound ways, like the powerful bond that formed between Mason, Sarah, and Willow. We've created a special playlist of equally moving stories that explore the extraordinary relationships between humans and animals in times of crisis. You can find it by clicking the link to your left. If this tale of resilience and second chances resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life's unexpected turns. What moment in Mason and Sarah's journey moved you the most? Was it Willow's incredible rescue, Mason's first adaptive riding lesson, or perhaps their wedding ceremony that celebrated not just their union, but the remarkable path that brought them together? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Until our paths cross again in another story, remember that sometimes salvation comes on 4 steady hooves, guided by an intuitive heart that recognizes courage when others see only limitation.